This week's episode of Man vs. Mob is a little bit late, and I apologize for that. I wanted to do an episode on the, I guess you could call it tragicomic absurdity that we find ourselves in the middle of, and the strange way that we have managed to convince ourselves to sort of be, I guess you could say, like woke in one way, and we're super concerned about how we treat other people of different races and genders and sexual orientations and all of that. But we have walked right into a trap of considering people of different political affiliation or ideology as the other. So whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or a liberal or conservative, progressive, whatever you want to call yourself, whatever label you have, is basically the new form of dissociating from someone because they're not your race, or they're not your nationality, or they're not your class, or they're not your religion. It's just a new, updated version of all of the things that we have struggled with over the course of the 20th century and the many preceding centuries with religion. So, yeah, it's a difficult time. Like I said before, tragic comic. You can't really divorce the two because every day you see something that is just utterly absurd. And yeah, we obviously entrench ourselves in our infinite feeds and our network news. And I think we can forget the bigger picture. So, this is sort of the equivalent of in the movie Titanic when the lifeboats go out and say, "Is there anybody out there? Is there anybody else who's alive who can hear me?" That's kind of what I'm doing right now. Is I'm basically trying to call a meeting of the minds, and this goes off of the tail end of last week's episode. I believe I called it Constitutional Convention 2021 or something like that. But this is my attempt to actually structure something in a more formal way. I've actually written a document, which is hopefully going to be a living document, but I really want to actually um, make that available to anybody because I don't think that the changes that need to occur and the reconsideration of how our various systems and institutions operate, I don't think that those are going to just happen by themselves or through the traditional channels. I think that there are all these adverse incentives and pressures and kind of corruptions that exist that, from my understanding, mean that we have to attempt to basically structure something outside of the given system, and then basically like Martin Luther with his 95 theses, just hammer that solution, that retrofit of what would improve our existing systems, hammer that to the walls of government and of corporations and say, this is what we recommend. We've done all the legwork. We've thought, or a lot of the legwork. We've thought this through. Well, the bickering has been going on in the background, and the he said, she said, they said, whatever has been going on. We need a heavy dose of thought. So I'm thinking I'm probably going to ultimately call this episode a call to thought rather than a call to action, because you need thought before you have action for it to be productive and deliberate. And I think that while we all exist in our own sort of fragments of a greater reality, um, none of those realities are really orbiting around any uh, common center of mass or anything that we share right now. It's so fragmented, and ultimately, I think that we need to have our individual interpretations and meaning that we derive from life, because ultimately this sounds depressing but it's actually empowering. Is life is inherently meaningless. You're supposed to generate your own meaning and purpose and live life towards those ends and not impose on others, but sort of fit your sense of meaning in with other people's sense of meaning and the narratives that you all have around a greater sort of sense of meaning and narrative. And That's what we're missing right now. We have all these fragmented ideas and people desperately trying to belong to groups and be tribal, but there's no common connectedness. So I suggest that we need a new narrative, we need a new ethical framework, we need to look at all of our institutions, say, how are they broken? How can they be fixed? Which ones need to be gotten rid of? And which institutions need to come into existence for the first time? Some of them won't even be institutions. They might be networks, they might be technological, they might be institution implies brick and mortar, sort of deep roots. Whereas moving forward, a lot of these things, which will change as technology develops rapidly, might have shallower roots. So they might be more modular. But anyway, I bring all this up because I am going to read the document that I put together. It's only a couple pages and followed by a few brief explanations. So without further ado, here is the start of the document. I called it Meeting of the Minds 2021. Here we go. We find ourselves on the verge of a paradigm shift that will obsolete the current versions of our institutions, upend our ethical frameworks, and destroy our shared narratives. The technological evolution is overtaking the industrial and agricultural phases of human history and creating immense discontinuity. While we argue about politics as usual, technological humanism remains unidentified within our broken discourse. In the coming years, artificial intelligence will overtake human intelligence as the most sophisticated force on planet Earth. It can be a force for enhancing humanity and sustainability, or one of dystopian chaos. Humans will evolve rapidly as random natural selection is overtaken by intentional intelligent design as the primary process of biological and societal evolution. Genetic and technological modification will change the human form, extend its life, and present new opportunities for the individual and the species. We will set our sights on healthier minds, broadened consciousness, understanding our origins, pursuit of infinite personal meanings, shared awe, enlightened wisdom, collaboration on endlessly complex challenges, creating and experiencing new realities, exploring space and time, and becoming something symbiotic with technology and altogether new on our evolutionary lineage. The disruptions of our algorithms will give us back our time as we shift from a Darwinian mindset of scarcity to one of abundance. COVID has been a test run for regarding time as a currency and resource for either mindful recalibration or thoughtless wasting. Moving forward, we'll be challenged to use idle time for creation, exploration, connection, and meaningful experience, rather than exchanging it for cheap, repetitive drudgery. When we aren't focusing so much on our energy, when we aren't focusing so much of our energy on mere survival, we're paid a social dividend. The environment selects less for the selfish and amoral, more for the thoughtful and considerate. Much of the behavior and chaos that we've taken for granted as the default state of humanity has been merely a snapshot of a transitioning species responding to the complex incentives of an abstract system. Adjusting our reformulating system toward a properly funded universal basic income is in all our best interest. This will help mitigate the disruption as new jobs become less numerous and more cognitively complex than old jobs, and many remaining jobs increasingly fracture into tasks and gigs of variable income. The deflationary effect of technology, while massively increasing the value of our currencies, will call into question common equity-based personal investment strategies, which have come to rely on inflationary stimulus policies. The transition from a materialist ownership mindset to an experiential access mindset will also continue generating larger economic currents. Leaning into technological innovation is our most promising chance at successfully navigating our murky and chaotic environmental and geopolitical crises. An economy less bogged down by needlessly wasteful jobs bureaucracies will create clearer pathways to global partnerships, along with a laboratory for exploring and implementing truly impactful sustainability initiatives at scale. The risks and rewards of this metamorphosis will be profoundly intertwined. The immensity of these changes requires a rapid adjustment and or recreation of our grand narratives, ethical frameworks, and shared institutions. We require an immediate meeting of the top minds. This is bigger than a Manhattan Project or a constitutional convention. This is a course charting for the closing out of the industrial era and renaissance of humanism. The roll call must include the intellectually, interpersonally, and technologically savvy. It demands the ethical, empathetic, and imaginative. We need 100 individuals of different professions, geographies, generations, ethnicities, genders, philosophies, incomes, political beliefs, spirituality, and experiences. This will be a modern version of the American founding, but with lives more diverse than 70 middle-aged Anglo-agriculturalist men from a few territories. The addition of technology will enable the sharing of ideas, the participation of the geographically distant, and the viewership of the general public. While this project is daunting, it is also essential. It will not happen within the established channels. Once we conclude a design of all the requirements and considerations for retrofitting our current decaying system for the 21st century, we will then hold our government and corporations accountable in the manner of Martin Luther, nailing his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral at the start of the Protestant Reformation. Apathy at this moment is forfeiture of a sensible future. So that's it. That is the general call to thought, as this episode is called. And I have some notes about the nature of the narrative that we need to compose. So if you're unfamiliar with the term humanism, it's basically the general ideologies that came into existence after religious narratives started to sort of break up a bit, particularly after the Origin of Species by Darwin. So you had various forms of humanist ideology, liberal humanism, socialist humanism, evolutionary humanism, and the main narrative that exists today is liberal humanism, and it's really starting to sputter and fall apart because of a number of factors, but particularly globalization and technological disruption. So what I recommend is a new shared narrative called technological humanism. And this narrative would have the ability to incorporate all of our individual narratives as well. So sort of like a shared a shared framework, if you will. And the idea is what shared understanding will enable convergence toward the same general direction again, because we're all spinning around chaotically and nobody really knows what to believe. People going against each other, people accusing each other of different things, people being entirely hypocritical, saying that one group's behavior is abhorrent when they themselves just did that behavior not too long ago, or ultimately will do that behavior in a couple weeks or a couple months. So huge inconsistency, tribalism, people obsessed with labels and not really the underlying ideas, people obsessed with personalities. He said, she said, Trump, Pelosi, Pence, Harris, Biden, everyone just focusing on personalities rather than underlying ideas, or trends or changes. So aside from the shared understanding and moving in the same general direction, what formulations of ideas ease the anxiety of uncertainty and overlaps with the greatest number of factions? Because there's so many different factions that exist right now. It's really impossible to have something that makes such a large number of people happy. So what really needs to happen is everybody needs to accept the fact that they are largely wrong, and that they're going to have to give up a piece of what they believe is their like absolute truth in exchange for like a shared sense of direction, or shared general principles. Because in the past, these narratives have gotten us into trouble, because you end up with things like the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany or any number of the religious horrors of the past. So people who are too obsessed with narrative rather than following principles like, liberty and freedom, and in making sure that people have the greatest capacity to pursue their sense of purpose and meaning and happiness without uh, basically repressing other people. That's what we want to move toward. Um, so not telling people what to believe or imposing narrative on them, but getting as many people to believe in contributing towards this same framework, and contributing towards um, how can we share in as many different experiences, and have a sense of accomplishment too, which will ultimately give each of us a sense of meaning and purpose. So what formulation of ideas, once again, eases the anxiety of uncertainty and overlaps with the greatest number of factions? And then the last point was, what propaganda will entice the general public while being as honest as possible? This is something that uh, has really been a problem for various movements and ideas in the past. Is you have this group of kind of intellectuals get together and come up with some framework or idea, and then the general public, who wasn't really involved directly in piecing it together, then needs to be sold on it. But not everybody has the same degree um, of competence, or the same capacity to understand at that abstract level. So how do you basically produce as honest of a representation of what you think will be best for everybody, and get people on board with it, rather than just selling them on some uh, cheap, low resolution version of the idea that it will ultimately disappoint them or cause some major uprising in the future, right? Um, how do you get as many people as possible to understand the concepts? How do you simplify them without being so oversimplified as to be dishonest? Um, so the new ethical framework is going to surround the concept of intelligent design, which I mentioned before. So if you think about how human evolution has occurred, or just general evolution has occurred throughout history, it's been random variation, sort of chance mutations, and some people or some organisms are better fit for certain environments than others, and over time the living organisms tend to exhibit more of the traits that were favorable in the past, or to various environments. As the environment changes, different traits go in and out of favor. So the new idea is going to be intelligent design, particularly as humans design technologies that adapt to various environments much more rapidly, and honestly create new environments that may have never existed before, very rapidly. That the principle behind that is going to be intelligent design, because natural selection works on the scale of thousands and millions of years and is very gradual, slow. Intelligent design is deliberate, and it happens relatively quickly. So if we're trying to figure out how to have humans interact with technology in effective and productive and meaningful ways, then that's going to require intelligent design and some degree of human technology interfacing and symbiosis. So if you think about something like what Elon Musk is trying to build with Neuralink, that's one of the biggest examples of the ongoing uh, and the ongoing investigation into that. So there's going to be genetic engineering and biological engineering. So, gene selection and gene editing. There's going to be cyborgism, which sounds really ridiculous, but if you think about it, the millennials are really the first generation cyborgs in that we already have this brain phone interface and it's just outside of our body. So we already have cyborgism to some extent. And then obviously there's going to be increasingly intelligent artificial intelligence as well. So yeah, there's a lot that doesn't make it into the general conversation, unfortunately. And the ethic is going to have to ask, what wisdom can we draw from leaders during prior paradigm shifts? Because this is ultimately what we're in right now. We're shifting from the technological phase. I'm sorry, the not evolutionary, the industrial revolution phase. This has all been an industrial paradigm where you think you have think about what you have factories and railroads and massive armies, and because armies are used to acquire resources to feed the industrial machinery and the industrial output, and you have mega farms and you have um, uh, pretty large cities with like tenements and huge waves of immigrants and all these different things. So, some of these things are going to continue, of course, but a lot of that has to do with the industrial phase of humanity, where humans in particular had to fill all of these demands and these roles. Um, it used to be during the agricultural phase, it was horses and beasts of burden. And then moving forward, it's going to be more technology that fills that need. So we're going to have more abundance, but there's going to be less jobs for people. So people are going to have to work on finding their own meaning in during idle time. And some people think that's going to be the great undoing of humanity, but I think it's going to unleash tremendous human potential. And the next Man, I am so excited for the future. I really am. I think this is a very turbulent transition phase, but you really have to see this for what it is in a greater context to appreciate that. So, what guardrails can we set for our creations to ensure that they aren't exploitative or suppressive? I think that Silicon Valley right now actually really, um, a lot of the people that work there are really hoping that some entity, whether it's probably government, but that guardrails are set for them so that they're not wholly responsible for the immensity of what they're creating. There's so many implications, there's so many trade-offs, there's so many moral questions around it. If you've watched the documentary The Social Dilemma on Netflix recently, you'll know what I'm talking about. Um, but there's just so many challenges to this, and it's uncharted territory. We're crossing so many frontiers simultaneously, and we take for granted every frontier that's already been crossed before us. But if you think about even just the last 100 years of human history, the great tragedies, the destruction and warfare, the Holocaust, the gulags, and all of what happened during the Cold War, World War I and World War II, but then all the triumphs too, all the technological triumphs, the fact that uh, we've created radio and television and the internet, and we're on the moon, and the human triumphs, all of the humanitarian accomplishment, and how all the good things that we've done for each other as well, the beauty that we've created, the wastefulness happening at the same time as the beauty. Obviously, we're paying an environmental price, but all of this is intertwined and swirling. So like you can choose to see only the negative if you want to cover one of the lenses of remember those 3D glasses? It was like a red lens and a blue lens. If you want to only see the world through one color lens, then you can do that, but it's just not a full view. It's not a full notion of the way that the world is. And you can do the same with the other lens, but the good and the bad, the good, the bad, and the ugly all together, that's what makes up reality. And so we need to synthesize all of we need to bring all of those together, and we need to face them all together. So I think we can do that. I just think it's going to be difficult, but I think we're up to the challenge. I think that we need to find the best of humanity and embody that. I think that we're going to repair our social fabric. Absolutely. It's just going to take a little while to recognize that the social fabric tears and then it mends again. And I've compared it before to like muscle fiber tearing at the gym and then becoming stronger muscle over time. So we're going to have a new social civic ethic. I look forward to that. Another question is, how can our creations maximize liberty, expand consciousness, and minimize collateral damage? Major questions. And how do we navigate entirely novel moral dilemmas? And what have we done wrong in the past? So think about past human creations, like particularly the creation of the atomic bomb. How did not just the average person handle that new world post bomb, the nuclear age, but the creators of this new profound technology? How did they handle it? What did Oppenheimer think? Publicly, privately, Einstein, Roosevelt, and as I had mentioned at first, the leaders during crises, particularly George Washington, as the United States came into existence as the first president, Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, where the country could have torn itself apart, and Roosevelt, FDR during the Great Depression and in World War II, where once again the world was just seemingly falling apart and there was so much chaos happening. So what can we pull from those moments of creative and profound leadership for this moment right now? Because this is similar and arguably at the same time much larger a transition for humans than those ones were. And I'm thinking that with enough innovation and willingness to engage in this thoughtfully, it can actually be a cleaner and smoother transition. We're not through it yet. We're not nearly through it, but we need to start having these conversations right now. They're not going to happen otherwise. So I think I've said my piece. And I guess what I'll say next is, oh, well, I'll do a quick run through of some of the institutions that I think that we need to look over. So I have notes on each of these, and I'm not going to read through all the notes, but here they are. The okay, so law enforcement in prisons, the war on drugs, big pharma, big tech, corporate media, corporatism, including the regulatory state and the welfare state, the military industrial complex, agriculture, particularly factory farming, energy, Hollywood, the Catholic Church, national security and surveillance state, including the FBI, CIA, and NSA, education, particularly higher education, but also primary education as well. So, the university system, academia for higher education, the jobs bureaucracies, federal and private, Wall Street, and finally, the constitutional amendments that we might need and the democracy reforms that would be necessary. So, for example, term limits for Congress and the Supreme Court, integration of smart technology, and how we could allow these various technological elements to be modular because they're going to be changing so frequently. And then reigning in this imperial presidency, final five and ranked choice voting, creation of a Department of Technology, all of these things. So please share this with anybody pretty much anybody, but particularly people that you think are going to be thoughtful and willing to engage in this and be a part of the call to thought and bringing people together in hopefully eventually in a physical capacity. But what I see as particularly over the next 6 months as COVID, um, as they work through the vaccine and as a lot of us are stuck at home before we get our lives in gear again, I was thinking that we could have fairly regular meetings and updates and sort of various assignments and little bits of homework of figuring out the adverse incentives that exist in all of these different systems, like the incentive for a district attorney to maybe convict someone because they get promoted based on the number of convictions that they have, or the incentive for the pharmaceutical industry, the PBMs, the pharmacy benefits managers, to um, maximize the cost that the insurance companies pay for the prescriptions and the cost that's passed on for insurance, because the PBMs get their um, get their income off of the price differences from what they pay from the pharmaceutical companies and what the pharmacies eventually pay. So they get a commission, basically. That's an adverse incentive that affects the whole system. So identifying those incentives and really brainstorming a whole series of structural reforms that we can then outline and build a document and a presentation surrounding and present this to a broader range of people, expose them to these things that otherwise they're not going to see in their social media feeds or the uh, the corporate news punditry, unfortunately. So thank you for listening to me. And as always, if you have any comments, questions, um, if you if you have any ideas, then please leave obviously a comment on my social media, my Instagram, Man Be Mob podcast on Instagram, on the YouTube channel. Subscribe, like, share, do all of that stuff, and I hope to be speaking with you soon. Thank you, and happy Thanksgiving.